Dzień dobry, chciałam tylko poinformować, że to będzie spotkanie po angielsku. Nie będę go tłumaczył, ponieważ nie jestem profesjonalną tłumaczką. Mam nadzieję, że to nie problem. Welcome everybody. My name is Joanna. I'm from the organizing committee of the festival. I'm part of the Center of Comics and Interactive Narratives here in Łódź. And also proudly, since, this year, the host of Sophie Castille Award in comics in translation. Together with me, we have the founders of the award, Ivanka Hahnenberger. Am I speaking with this? Yes, that's fine. Great. And Gravett. And today I wanted to, first of all, talk about the award, how it came to be, but also about the importance of translation in the international comics distribution, how we actually build the world of comics by bringing foreign books to different countries. Both Paul and Ivanka have extensive experience within different markets. Paul is, for example, an expert in Asian Japanese comics, has traveled quite a lot, written quite a lot. Ivanka has been working with rights and publishing since, I don't know, many, many years, right? 15, yes. We just want to basically talk about this. And first of all, Ivanka, I wanted for you to kind of expand on what you said last night about the awards. You mentioned, of course, Sophie Castille as kind of the reason why the awards came to be, but I'm sure you also thought about them before. Like, this is the first award in translation in comics in the world. Is that right?
It's the first international award. Many festivals have their own award, but this is one that we hope, as Paul says, the world. We do have 6 countries, 7 languages, 7 awards. We're hoping to get more. But many years ago I had this idea, and I wanted to call it the Rosetta Awards. And I started talking about this.
Do you know what the Rosetta is?
We have the same. Knowledge.
Yes. So I want to call them the Rosetta Awards, and I actually presented it at New York Comic Con in 2010 to a bunch of people, PR people. I was talking to PR people. Because the easy people to convince in our business, whether it's translating or anything, are the editors, because they love it. The hardest people in our business to convince are the PR and the marketing people. And the true story, I was in New York Comic Con, and to a super big PR person at a super big comics company, and I said, I want to do this international translation award. I want to call it the Rosetta Stone. And he said, the what? No, the Rosetta Awards. He said, the what? I said, like this. He says, I know what it is, but do you think anyone else will understand? I said, okay, we'll try this again.
I think perhaps some people might have thought you meant the Rosette Stone, because you get a nice, ribbon rosette.
Yeah.
Not Rosette.
So I've had this idea for a long time, and Sophie and I talked about it. Sophie started really in the 90s, pushing international borders, getting comics overseas, really. And even though she did work for media participations, I think she worked for someone else before that, I don't know, SWAT, but it was never, it was about media participations, but her theory was, what's good for the industry is good for me. And so she pushed the industry forward. She pushed boundaries. She got people to buy things. And not just, she would promote other companies' comics to people, which I do as well. I'm an agent, but I push other people's comics. And our theory is we need to, our life is hard enough, but we all love this art. We look at the art, we look at the stories, and we want to be able to read them. How many have Paul and I seen to this day and have like, I wish I could read those, I wish I could read this. So the only way for you to read it is to translate it. So that's why we did it.
Yeah, of course, the history of translating comics is long, but it's often been really dominated by America, especially. America's managed to push its comics almost everywhere, and there hasn't been a reciprocal development. And it took a long time, as you know, just the previous talk here was about manga, and that took a long time to get into other languages. And for many, many decades, it was thought to be something that would never make it, that could never cross over. It's backwards. It's, how can we even do it if we flip it around or you mess around and everything? So yeah, that's a very good point. I'm also quite like Ivanka, and I'm very determined that we must open up to many more comic cultures and have as much interchange and discovery. Because when I was growing up, in my teens, all my friends at school were kind of getting bored with comics. How could you possibly get, nobody says, I'm bored with, maybe you do, but I'm bored with rock music, or I'm bored with films or something. You don't give them up. But of course, that's the question, then what do you go on to find if you start to get bored? And that's where finding stuff, fortunately, I speak French, I learned French at school, and I didn't realize just how vital that was going to be to my life and my profession, I guess. So being able to read comics from other languages just opens you up to other cultures, other kinds of storytelling. It's exactly why manga's worked, of course, is because we want to see something that is different. And I have this theory that there's definitely a cultural war going on between particularly America and Japan, and specifically with DC, so Marvel, Warner, and the giants of Japan, but more generally in popular culture. And it seems pretty clear to me that it is Japan that's winning. And there are several reasons for this, but amongst them, I think, fundamentally, is that we don't know what kind of stories we're going to get. With the Marvel and DC superheroes especially, there's never too many surprises. Well, especially there's no surprises if death is temporary, which, as you know, it isn't, as far as I'm concerned, it is. Whereas in Japan, the stories are fresh and different and responding to the zeitgeist, responding to new ideas, and it's author-driven, not property-driven. You don't get 500 people drawing Astro Boy over and over and over, which if Astro Boy had been American, there would be an Astro Boy multiverse, and we'd be watching not another Astro Boy movie or whatever TV show. Nothing against the American material, but we know that the big two are very, very slow to innovate, and they just keep pumping out the same product. And the reason they do that, fundamentally, is they don't allow creators to own what they're creating. This is just so fundamental to Japan and to France, and hopefully also here at home to a large extent, creators own, because they are thought of as authors. As in France, there is the droit d'auteur, the right of a creator, the moral right to own what they create. But the fundamental difference is that in America, the publishers, the two big two, Marvel, DC, they began as essentially very cheap exploitative publishers. Before comics, they were doing pulps, they were doing spicy magazines, and they did not come to comics from books. Whereas in Japan, the big publishers, Kodansha, Shueisha, Shogakukan, all of them were book publishers and magazine publishers, and comics happened to develop out of that. And that's a whole different mindset if you have serious people from publishing involved. That's a very long answer, but that's just the context to make you realize that there is a culture war going on, and there are reasons why America could still triumph, or at least fight back. It just needs to give more creators ownership.
I just want to say that I think our point is that we don't want anyone to triumph, we want the world to triumph.
Yeah, we want to.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to insert something about Poland here, because up to 1989 we were behind the Iron Curtain, so access to worldwide comics was quite limited. And the thing is, that's when the Polish authors kind of thrived. They weren't many, but there were several who could basically make a living out of comics. Something that's currently almost unheard of. Comic book authors, writers, illustrators, they have to find other work beside comic books. Of course, they do own rights to their work, as you said. However, it's not particularly profitable business, let's just say. And the thing is, in the 90s, 90s, we were opened to the world of comics, and it was of course a great thing because suddenly you had access to everything that was previously unavailable, but it also absolutely murdered Polish comics. There was a huge collapse because it was easier for the publishers to get cheap licenses, especially for American comic books. So we had this, there was this Swedish publisher called TM Semik. So they were publishing short, issues of American superhero comics, and that's where everything went. In the 90s also, we started getting Japanese animation, manga, and that also influenced a lot of people. And right now, I think we're in the middle of that war that you just said. And currently, for example, for me, as an organizer of this festival, also someone who's trying to promote Polish works, we're kind of between these two gigantic monsters, and especially the Japanese comics, I think. But I also understand why. Obviously, of course, they have the PR, the publicity of being lawyers, and the lawyers, and the cinematic universes, and Disney backing, you know, Warner backing, all of that. Since we live in Americanized culture in general, in Poland, I think, especially, maybe other parts of the world too, but I think here it's pretty obvious, the McDonaldization of things. But when it comes to Japanese comics, the thing is that especially young women, girls, teenage girls, for example, for years have had no comic books for their own, and the only place they find something that interests them, the topics, you know, the stories, the visual aspects, they find it in Japanese comics. Korean comics, webtoons currently are very popular. And it's difficult to kind of insert yourself with a Polish offer for these girls, because they just can't find what they want within that aspect. So there's also this part of the equation which makes translation also be a bit of a problem. And I wonder if in your experience with other markets, have you noticed like markets being devoured by these giants, local markets?
Yeah, I mean, you know, we're all facing this manga issue, I mean, manga's fine. I mean, I love its variety, its depth, and the page count is really appealing. It's bang for your buck, as the Americans say. But I think I just want to back up a little bit. One of the astonishing things about Polish arts is that it is deep and wide and very varied. And very creative. I used to shoot films here in Bruges in the 80s and 90s, so I used to come to Hollywood twice a year. So I've seen that, and the depth of the cinematographers and I mean, the reason we came here is because you had a school here that pumped out these great editors, these great cinematographers with new ideas, right? New ideas all the time. Whereas I was working from America, we don't have new ideas because new ideas are expensive. And so we used to come here, and so I find the same thing with the comic. I went to the Film Museum, to the Polish History exhibit, which I absolutely, positively recommend to everybody. It's incredible. But there are statistics there, and there are statistics in the Comics Museum.
Which is Narodowe Centrum Kultury Filmowej na wystawę Kino Polonia, tutaj w Łodzi.
And in the Film Museum, there's a statistic of, I think it was in the 1930s or 40s, I'm terrible with that kind of stuff, but anyway, I just saw the numbers because I'm a numbers person, and it said that there were, this year X, whatever year it was, 459 films made in Hollywood. There were 28 produced in Poland, and Poland got 2 Oscars. Like, whoa, you standing there looking at that, and I was with Greg, I was like poking Greg, are you getting the statistics here? And I was like, it's amazing, that's amazing. And I think that's the same thing we're seeing with Polish comics, and I think the problem we're all facing is not that manga is better, or, I mean, it's varied, it's great, it's, as I said, it comes out quickly, which is a lot of things. And Marvel and DC have this big machine, but frankly, I can't see any more tights and capes. I just like, if I see another one of those, you know, and of course all the women have big boobs, glossy waists, and that's getting old too. It has nothing to do, I really don't think it has to do with the issue of getting Polish comics into translation or French comics, you know, huge industry in France. They're also having trouble. And I remember when I went to Jack Glenn, I said, okay, I'll hire you as my agent. And he said, so T-Tough, which will never work in America, but anyway, T-Tough, we do print runs of 250,000. We have 69 million people, and he's sitting in there going, so every single T-Tough albums have had 1.3 million print run. I'm like, no. Okay. And it's 16% of Americans buy books. So already you're, and so you have to think about that, right? But we're getting there, and that's what Sophie and I want to do, is we're getting there. There's a market collapse in the US, I think now. We're trying to kind of figure out, no one's really talking about it. And before, Americans wanted to do their own comics, and there was 400 comic acquisitions in 2023, I think it was. So Original IT's Publisher's Marketplace will tell you. And those comics didn't come to fruition, most of them, or if they did, they weren't good. Why? Because there's no editors in America. So this is the kind of things you have to think about when you're thinking about translation markets. Not just, is the comic good and is the editor good? But there's all these issues that are being faced. And I think now, because of the collapse, I think this is the time for French comics, for Polish comics, German comics, I think, have a little bit less, they're brave, there's minor plus, there's not as much variety. This is the time now. I mean, I know it. It's coming.
About America, is it true that only 3–5% of books published there are translated? Do you know this statistic?
Translated into or out?
Into English.
Oh yeah, that's probably like a bigger number than it is. I mean, they sort of feel it, and rightfully so. They feel we have all this talent, so why don't we use it? But in comics, we do have the creative talent. Like, there's schools and schools and schools, but we don't have the editorial talent. We don't have the business talent. And if you don't have that, that's what's going to stop it coming in.
I think what could also help publish the comics, and maybe you can talk to people in the government or the Ministry of Culture or something, is in other countries, for example, like Finland, have got a very active cultural program to help fund translation and to even help fund editions. Certainly the Dutch have it, for example, as well. And if you could persuade somebody in government to say, look, this is great soft power diplomacy, cultural diplomacy, it's what the Japanese obviously have already realised too. It's part of it is that it's driven by, let's get across Japan is a cool country. We want Poland to be cool. So let's get some Polish comics translated, and then you can talk to publishers in other countries, France or wherever, and they know that they can get some costs covered to help towards the translation.
Let's just say that
is that a fantasy of mine?
It is possible, but it's slow. Like, comic books weren't part of the Polish Literary Institute offer for a long time, and I think they started including us in their catalog 3 years ago or something. It's also political, obviously. You know, it depends on who runs the government at the moment. But yeah, there is some. Of course, every time a Polish book gets translated into a different language, it's an event. So, for example, Fantagraphics has picked out quite a few books from Polish, and they're going to publish them in the States. Several countries in Europe also do that, which is great. But it's still, a lot of Polish books are actually quite local, regional.
That's a problem everyone has. That's a problem I have in France. That's a problem we have. I mean, in America, we have. The problem is that we've McDonaldified everybody around the world, so American culture is recognized. But that's a general problem. But I'm not. the Philippines has a great program to fund translations, but the problem doesn't really lie there. I was talking about this with Claude Saint-Vincent at Media Participations. He's now the VP, but he was the CEO, he's retired fellow. And we were saying that the problem is not, as I said, it's not convincing the editors, it's not finding the funds for translation, it's getting the marketing and the PR people, the salespeople in America, I mean, convinced that it's okay if it's a Polish comic, no one will notice, or it's okay if they notice. And that's a seriously, seriously big problem.
Yeah, I would say also that actually, maybe I'm not like most people, but I think I'm a little bit of an internationalist. And I think it's quite a good attitude to have. We should be curious about other cultures and other countries. I mean, we're on this planet together, and we don't to explore it a little bit, not necessarily physically, but through culture, including, of course, comics. And so I would say that sometimes some of you say, well, it's very Polish, like this book that's won the first literary award festival about this incredible festival in 1955, which I just...
Januszewski Festival.
Yeah, and this is a literary success, so that's going to make some publishers take notice. But then if you go, oh, it's about this very obscure bit of Polish or Eastern European history, it's not obscure because we're living in this on the same planet and we should be curious about the things. The Cold War is still in, we're in a new Cold War, whatever kind of war it is, there's still these tensions. And if you can at least provide maybe a bit of context, obviously you shouldn't presume that a reader's going to know what it's about, but if you can reposition it to make it appeal to an international audience, I think people will be fascinated by it. And also the comic itself is a very inventive one. The graphics, the design is very good. It's not, I'm pleased to say, in many ways, it's not a slightly dull documentary comic where, which can be pedestrian and not terribly imaginative.
The thing is that, because of course I read it, and it's brilliant, but it's also quite demanding of the reader. Like the context isn't explained. It's something that you have to kind of research after. Some people will understand immediately, some won't. So it would require quite a lot of repositioning.
Maybe it's sort of very, very dense footnotes under every panel or something. But there might be a way to get quite. If you found a Polish celebrity, I don't know if this would be an author, for example, somebody that is international, maybe a movie director. And maybe there could be a movie of the book, of course. That could also be, seems to me to be
that's another conversation.
But still, I mean, the point is that someone that could help also provide that access. It's just allowing people in to the material. It's why something like Persepolis obviously became a phenomenon when it could have so easily disappeared. It was also, of course, the timing and the context of post 9/11, and everyone wanted to understand Iran, etc. Suddenly, then if you hadn't had to we probably wouldn't have had the breakthrough interest. We wanted to understand it. I mean, Persepolis was even being taught at West Point Military Academy to American soldiers who were probably going to go out there, I think, just to give them a little bit of context. So I think that there are unexpected ways that you might be able to find things can cross over.
I think here in Poland, actually, we're quite open. The internationalism you mentioned. Because the offer here, every year we publish around 1,500 books. Out of that, 10, maybe 15% are Polish. The rest is all translations, and most of these, of course, American, Japanese, yes,
French,
but a lot of French and a lot of comics from, Sweden, Spain, Portugal,
I'm impressed with the Polish publishers like Manioko who've just been doing Brazilian, Japanese comics into Polish, which as far as I know, maybe have never been translated anywhere else yet. Maybe amongst the first people to do this. So yeah, we have a very innovative publishing scene here.
Yeah, I haven't been everywhere, okay, far from it, but from what I've seen, I think the Polish comics industry is probably the most open industry I've seen here. The Japanese isn't very open, and fair enough. The United States is just not open, and the terrifying aspect of what's terrifying that could happen will make it even less open. And the French, as big as the market is, it also is doing a bit of that Americanization thing, is we don't really need the outside stuff as much as because they have just so many authors. But Poland, I think, I've never seen such a variety of comics here, but also you have publishers that are taking foreign authors and publishing them here first.
Yeah.
You know, it's so, and translation is just a key to the Polish market, and I'm just hoping that one day we can say translation is a key to the French market and is a key to the American market. The French have now a fund that supports translating into French. Now that is big, okay, because that means a government is supporting imports of an industry that they have a plethora of. And when I heard that, I was very excited. I mean, that's really great. That is opening borders, that is translation, that is what we want to do. And that's hopefully where we'll all go.
I mean, just to discuss the actual translation process, which I think Winston was talking a little bit about in his manga panel just before, but the awards, as we know, just to clarify, that the awards go to a translator, but we're not actually judging it based on reading the original text.
It's not scholastic.
Yeah, it's not, for example, if it's a manga, we're not going to go back and check the original Japanese and compare it. I mean, we could be here forever if we did that, I think. So it has, the test is, as you all know, if you're reading a translated comic, you've got to read it and go, it shouldn't be, you shouldn't be aware it's translated. It should be so well translated that you're completely absorbed in the story. But that is a very skillful, it's a hugely skillful art. It's not just a function or a process, it's an art form. And it's even more of a challenge. I've done nothing like as much as Ivanka, but in my years I have done some translations of short stories when I was publishing a magazine called Escape, and we translated people like Tardy and other greats into English for the first time. From French I can do. And you have a lot of limitations. I mean, the obvious one is the space. The space is often very difficult.
And the images, you can't switch. You're stuck with the image, right? Because sometimes when you're translating, especially from French to English, orders fit, the order of logic switches, but if you have this person saying it then, there, and that, you can't switch any order around.
No. And that was also, of course, the reason why flopping or flipping manga became a huge problem. It's not, it was just the expense of it, but also the fact that then everyone went from being right-handed to left-handed, and left-handed raw. But even so, and then also, you know, the outfits were the wrong way around. All sorts of things were incorrect. And of course, the artist. Just think about any artist. You imagine any Western artist being told, well, you'll publish your work, but it has to be mirror flipped, you know. And then that exposes sometimes that the drawing maybe isn't quite mirror. So all those reasons is what led to this 100% authentic manga boom led by Tokyo Pop, who basically doing it not really to be authentic, they were doing it to save the hassle and the cost of flipping these books. But it's now, and this is something I think anyone could have predicted, that we would be reading backwards. There is a wonderful English word, I love words, and especially, this is a real word, I always remember what it is, because there's dextrosinistrality, or sinistrodextrality, and I think it's dextrosinistrality, which is the ability to read from right to left, and as well as left to right. That's a skill, if you read manga, your brains are actually a little bit more developed than most people, because many people couldn't cope with it. So it's a very positive thing in that respect too.
Yeah, and as I'm always saying, the Sophie Castille Awards are for that seamlessness. And I have to admit that I have failed in translation. I had a comic that I was translating for Fair Square, Fabrice Sapolsky, I don't know if you know him. Lovely little tiny publisher in America, very talented guy, who's John Batman in English. And I translated, I mean, you could read it, it was in good American English, but he wrote me, he said, you just didn't get it. He said, I didn't think I could, but it was, and I should have turned it down. So here's the other thing is, learn to say no when you get a contract. It was taking place in the banlieue of France with underprivileged Muslim children and a Muslim teenager who's being tortured by a friend. But the whole thing happens in what we call Verlan, which is like the reverse French language. But with I did not have those sensibilities. And so I was trying to culturally appropriate, and it didn't freaking work. And so Fabrice said, I love you, and I'm redoing it.
Another thing I think many people forget is that in order to do a great translation, you don't have to just know the language you're translating from. You actually have to write extremely well in your own language. Be an author, have a great sense of wordplay and all that. And I think it's, especially with translations from English, I think it's in Poland and maybe in other parts of the world, people are like, yeah, of course I speak English, I can translate. Even myself, you know, and actually I think it's more important to be able to, even if as a translator you don't feel as good, as fluent in the language you're translating from, but at least you're researching, you're checking. You know, you can actually do a better job if you're if you try to find the answers to something that worries you, because if you're used to translation, for example, you feel confident, you can get overconfident, for example.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and actually the funny thing, coming back to the point of, sorry Paul, coming to the point of respecting translation, what does often happen is editors and publishers don't respect translation. First of all, I think it comes from terror. They're terrified because they don't understand the original language. So they just don't know what they're getting. And so they're absolutely terrified. So I often have done translations where the editor doesn't check my work. And I'm human. You know, you need to have a give and take, which is the problem we have in comics editing in America. Is there's no editors that know how to edit comics, so they just give the creators the go and they say just edit in when you're done. Really? So that's kind of what they do to translators. The other thing that they do is they speak a little bit of French, and they speak enough French to get themselves into trouble, but not out of it. So, for example, I did a translation of a book called Climate Changed, which is now in many universities in America, many high schools in America, but I was translating it, and the editor spoke French, and there's a part where it says in French, la croissance de chaleur de l'eau. La croissance de chaleur de l'eau, it's croissant. La chaleur de l'eau est croissant, with a T, croissant. And which means that the temperature of the water is rising. And the editor wrote, corrected my text, and said, no, there's more croissants in France.
What about French patisserie? Is it okay, right? You have a patisserie crisis.
Because I know French.
Yeah.
So, you know.
That's a nice kind of crisis. I don't mind about more croissants.
But there were no croissants in image. There were.
No, dear, well, this is what happens.
I think there were shrimp. There was a graph and there were shrimp that were like multiplying.
Okay, so the shrimp was the croissant.
Well, there was famously the two great Franco-Belgian comics, of course, they got translated into English, Tintin and then later on Asterix. We had amazing translators. What's interesting, I'm interested to thought about this, is that they weren't solo translators. They were two people working in each case.
I work as two with my mom.
There you go, you have it's a family affair, it's a family business. Yeah. But having that, you need someone to bounce it off. You have a colleague. And Hergé famously so admired the translation of his Tintin books. He said that actually the English version is better than the originals. He thought it was just funnier, better. And then the translators of Asterix did a brilliant job. But again, you've got huge challenges because you've got so many puns and wordplay, more so than in Tintin and Asterix, of course. But yeah, the two people, but the woman Anthea Bell is one of the greatest translators. She didn't just do comics, she did Asterix extraordinarily well with Birek, I his name was. And where she got into translating, and that's a whole other interesting thing. How do you get into becoming a comics translator, especially? She was a translator of fiction more generally. Is that as a kid, as a child with her brother, they grew up every morning at the breakfast table. Their father was set the crosswords for the Times newspaper each day. It was the London Times, the really complicated, cryptic crosswords, which with so many clever bits of wordplay and stuff. So he would test out the new clues he come up with on his kids at breakfast. So they're just being raised with language and lateral thinking and made them into brilliant, into a brilliant translator. Yeah.
But of course, Asterix in America is being retranslated now because it's...
Well, there are problems with this too, because of course some references are not going to be so clear to people. As we go through time, legends or pop references, cultural references get more lost, and so how do you update these things?
Right, and also, so they're retranslating all the 48 volumes now, and they have to dumb them down.
Did they also have to put some footnotes or something just to explain some of it?
They had to have an internet. So I represent Asterix and so they had to write a paragraph. I can't remember who's done it now, but an introduction saying women with big boobs and wasp waist and blacks with big lips, and we're very sorry. This was written in the '60s when that didn't matter. But I think they have changed the colors of the lips, so they have to do all that. And then they basically dumbed down a lot of that stuff because Americans are not getting smarter. So.
Yeah, with manga, very often they will not have extensive footnotes at the back, and that's one of the factors behind it. And then I was watching a very interesting panel discussion from the New York Anime Con. We didn't see very often, but they had translators on a panel talking about their work translating manga. And I don't know how this works, you may know much more, I'm sure, about this, but the manga translators, they have to do a lot of work. It's not just, okay, here's the text, I'm going to type it out, here's my text file. They position the text into the balloons. They even have to do retouching of some of the artwork, because sometimes the balloons change size and things. They also have to do, sometimes they will draw or re-letter the sound effects that they're being put into, taken away from the original Japanese ones. So it's again, the page rate can be as low as $1 a page. When someone said that on the panel, there were like boos from the audience. But I mean, we know this is, and I mean, okay, some men have got very many balloons in all, sometimes some of the pages, so it isn't as intense. But that's the challenge, of course.
I mean, I had a publisher turn me down because I had a publisher turn me down because I was asking for 25 cents more a page. So now you're too expensive. It's like, well, okay, I'm too expensive. But I refused to back down. I just refused. I was like, I don't even want to work with this person because this is only the beginning.
But I think the market crisis you mentioned, I think it's also here in Poland. I think there's many publishers that are cutting down the costs, and editing, of course, is one of them.
Yeah, copy editing. How many books have you read with mistakes in them?
Yeah, that's part of an issue. And yeah, I actually, after this this panel, there's another one with the Polish team of translators speaking about translation. And yesterday we spoke a little bit, and I mentioned that in Poland also there are editors, the publishers that don't have editors for the comics, and we always notice that fact, no matter if the translation can be great, but if there's no editor,
we're human, Yeah, it's a very, very hard business.
I mean, the other development, will obviously be there's a controversy about AI being used more for translation now. We just, like in the same way that Google Translate, of course, is what we all kind of, it's useful, but you shouldn't just plonk it in straight away without at least checking if it makes sense or reads naturally at all. But that's going to be an issue for translation, I know already, not just for comics across the board. It's going to be, AI more generally, it's going to be a transformative thing. We're already living through this.
Yeah, I mean, I cheat. I do. But you know what?
No, I don't think it's cheating.
Yeah,
but it's because you're still applying your translation expertise to what comes out. It's not just being dropped in.
But I can tell you that 90% of the time when I cheat, I like, oh my God, it's going to be so much harder to correct this than start all over again. And I do it because I'm lazy, and then I say, well, whenever you're lazy, you lose, right? So, but I'm not opposed to AI, because last night Paul and I wanted to understand the awards. I put on my phone, and we were like, oh my God, we understood everything. They weren't, as soon as Adam started talking a bit sort of nuancy and funny, then it got really weird, and you had no idea what he was talking about. But I think AI is exciting. I mean, I think anything modern is exciting. I mean, I went into animation in late 80s, and no one was doing animation. It just exploded. And I had my own digital content company in 2003. When people had banana Nokias, I went to Asia, so they had 3D phones. I was like, oh my God, digital content, that's it. And I came back to Europe, and I got the rights for free from Led Zeppelin and all this stuff. They all gave it. They're like, what are you talking about? Content on the phone? Yeah, you can have it. I was like, oh my God. And then, of course, when I got wise, so I was the punk. But the thing is, it comes back to editors. AI is fine, but it needs a babysitter. You can't just, you can't just use AI. It needs a babysitter. And it's much harder to babysit stuff that comes out of AI. I'm not a graphic artist, so I would think that would be really, really hard. But it's much harder to babysit, because sometimes you have to redo it. But you gotta babysit, you can't just let AI, maybe people are saying to me in years it'll happen, I still don't think so. Because we're still unique individuals. We each have there's a French philosopher who says every single individual has their own language and their own way of dressing, and their own codes. And we all have our own language. People, like when you read a book, you know it's written by because they write that way, right? So, but it needs babysitting, and I don't understand why people don't get that. Like, it's a new type of creator, but it's a very important one.
Yeah, I think we need to see broadening out just in terms of different comic cultures. I think the other big one, as we've been discussing, of course, also is the arrival of the Korean webtoon, which is again something that has transformed the comic culture. We never heard about Korean comics, basically. And that's the most astonishing change, because I don't know if you realize this, but as recently as the late 1990s, in Korea, their very extreme government at that time would do public burnings of comic books on their sort of family values day, but alongside, obviously, because they were thought of as bad as drugs and drink. And here we are with a culture that's suddenly just taken on because they had the connectivity, they had all the mobile phones. And then there's a big issue which some creators have been discussing even over this weekend as well, of the form of the webtoon, which I think many of you are familiar with, which is essentially, as you know, one panel at a time. They can be incredibly long, perhaps. There can be gaps between them. And it means that every panel is a surprise, whereas in a book, every turn of the page is a surprise. Otherwise, you can't really surprise anybody, because you're going to look ahead, essentially. But that is really kind of limiting the language of comics enormously from what we know how they work in books. And it is strange to me that when the whole internet was first being developed, the idea of webcomics, Scott McCloud coined this term infinite canvas, the idea that you could just we were free of the page, and the comic could go in different directions. You could have like a portal into a much bigger world, or it could go off in right to left or whatever. But actually, it's all being written our phones, and much as we're completely umbilically attached to them almost every moment, they don't really offer us as much of an experience as we could be getting from them, because essentially vertical means scrolling, and then horizontal means watching, whether it's TV or whatever it might be. And that's limiting. And I'm hoping we're going to see more exploration of the potential of digital comics to expand that, and alongside that, also getting it into multiple languages.
Well, I think in Angoulême last year they had, or was it last year, the year before, not last, I get a little confused with Angoulême. So not 2024, but 2023, they had a Korean panel, and the Korean government woman who was there said that in the 23 or 22, was it that? Yeah, I can't remember. Because I'm already saying this year's Angoulême, which is actually 2025, so it's actually technically next year's Angoulême. So the woman said that in Korea, I don't remember totally the statistic, 89% of comics are read online. In Europe, 89% of comics are paper. I mean, that's diametrical.
I think the same thing is with Chinese comics. Like they don't exist in paper, almost non-evident, really nothing. Yeah, but the idea with them is that they almost always sell the IP, so the character. The character comes first, the merchandise comes first. The story is like a secondary aspect of everything else. In Korea it's a bit different, but I think it's also a little bit damaging, because they also treat them as IPs. Their offer is that they're a manufacturer of IPs and content, which I think is very harmful when it comes to creativity. If there's any country that I think is kind of turning into this like a place where AI content can be embraced. I think it's Korea, because it seems that the ideas for the stories are just hashtags, something that can be researched and found and shown through algorithm.
Yeah.
Why doesn't the public want something? Why doesn't the public want something more? It's kind of odd to me. I understand, fine, it's all about the money, but doesn't the public want something better? I mean, I know in Poland, the reason there's so much incredible art and creativity is because people like art and culture and creativity. I mean, it's part of your DNA. It's part of France's DNA, so I would think that the Korean people would have a cultural revolution.
Well, what I understand, at least from the webtoon, I'm not sure how it's maybe changing more with AI, but the webtoon explosion has really empowered creators. I mean, they are getting a lot of money from these platforms. You might not realize it's not just going out from giant publishers, it's actually portal sites like Naver and Down and other ones, where people go to do everything, and then they also therefore have a captive audience that wants to read these madness stories. And these artists are doing well. I mean, they get some money from every single viewing and this kind of thing. And of course, the first taste comes free. Right. Then if you want to read the next episode, you can wait. You can't wait.
That gets rid of gatekeepers, which is good.
Yes, exactly. So and I think there is creative control. And what's so impressive, I've been to Korea a few times, and they have a global webtoon center in Busan, and a festival.
It's wonderful.
Have you been there too?
No, I've never been there, but we were heavily influenced myself. I was very heavily influenced when we were designing our Center of Comics.
Yes.
It's great. It's interactive. It's different than a regular museum, art gallery.
Absolutely. It's tremendous. And they're there because people are consuming on a huge scale. But there's been a very interesting development that happened there because the public. Well, two things. One is the webtoons, unlike the comics culture generally, certainly beforehand. And by the way, they used to be called manhwa. And like we say, I don't read comics, I read graphic novels. People say, I don't read manhwa, I read webtoons, but they're comics, of course. But what's happening when they get the public is very engaged with these stories because these stories, there are a lot of stuff that's the usual genre thing. But unlike most Korean media, they are tackling social issues. Difficult content sometimes, and they can often then get made into a movie or a TV show. And the public is so engaged that they really want to make sure that the story is told faithfully when it's transferred. They are going to discuss who's the right actor, the right people involved. And they're dealing with issues. For example, one of the big hits was a series called Missaying by Yoon Tai-ho, who I got to interview and meet him when I went over there. And this is dealing with the world of internship. I don't know anything much about this, but interns that are always, hopeful for a job, but in the meantime they're going to get minimum tiny bits of pay, and they go from one internship to another, and their careers never take off. Yeah, and this was something that the main media wasn't talking about, and Yoon Tai-ho addressed this directly in a critical way, and it became a phenomenon as a film as well.
I think we're I was talking about something that I noticed in webtoons, international ones. There are kind of two current genre tropes. It's the isekai, entering a different world. With a protagonist who already has a part of the knowledge that makes him powerful, for example, and the trope is, I think it's already dead in the sense that there's so much of the exact same story, whether you enter the video game, whether you enter a book, whether the character enters something else. You are reborn as someone from a story you read, and therefore you have the knowledge to maybe change the story. In Angola, they had the offer, the Korean webtoons, and it was just a page after page of the exact same story, just written with slightly different, maybe terms. And every company said that they can produce like 1,000 titles each year. It's gigantic.
The French comics is so varied, it's kind of odd. I just want to say two things quickly. One, i.e. Internship. There's a French comic called Yatou, which is published by sloth comics in Scotland, which is about that issue. And second thing, you grew up in a translator family.
Yeah.
What was that like? What did that do to you for books and translations?
Okay, so my father is a translator. He's translating comics from French to Polish. He taught himself most of the time. Like he
did French at school?
He didn't have French at school. He only learned later to read comics, of course, because that was the 60s, 70s, 80s. What did that do to me? Well, I definitely appreciate the works of translators now. I also know that it can be very rewarding for him. It's very enjoyable. Translating comics is at least faster, but it also never ends. Like my father, in particular, he's in a constant. He's constantly translating something. He's never in a situation when he's like, okay, I'm done. I'm not doing anything for the next 2 weeks. No, there's always something. That's also one of the things about the awards, because I didn't speak about the Polish edition of the awards yet, and we have 4 minutes to do so. But this year we've had 64 entries from 12 publishers. 2 manga publishers were included in that. Some publishers sent us every single translation they had. Although we did limit it to a translation by 1 person per publisher. So for example, if, say, my father translated a comic for a particular publisher, they would only submit 1 translation, the other publisher would submit another, and so on, so on. And we did that because there's not as many people translating, actually, especially in Italian and French. There's many people who are translating from English, obviously, but there are other languages that have several people who are doing them over and over and over again. And just very good names, that are actually deserving of an award like this. I was also thinking that maybe at some point we should include like a life achievement award, maybe at some point, because if we do only one title per year, there will be people who will never be rewarded, for example, despite having great achievements. This is something that maybe you can also think about. Or
Slovenia is doing children and adults.
Yeah.
So there's
option 2, yeah.
There's a literary award for translation in Poland that has 2 awards, one for a particular translation from the previous year or 2 years, and one Life Achievement Award. So I also thought that
Life Achievement Award.
It's also a good idea. But what I wanted to also say is that what's interesting, I think, is that recently a lot of publishers that care about the quality of their books have been asking translators from the literary world to get into comics, and they found them. They often find it very interesting a challenge. So maybe we're going to see actually better translations soon, more varied.
I had Simon & Schuster approach me. Simon & Schuster approached me to translate a series of children's books called The Little Vampire, which I written in German. And they approached me because they said, when you translate comics, you must know a lot about dialogue, and these little vampire books are heavily dialogued. And I worked with my mother, who's an actress, right? So dialogue is just her thing. I mean, she plays every part in every comic and gets away with it. It's the most fun in the world. So I do the heavy lifting, and then she's like, no, you wouldn't say that, because she's reading it like an actress. So so she'll come to something, and my theory and her theory in the translation is if you stumble, you fall. So if the reader stumbles, they fall. So let's say we've lost them, they'll close the book or they'll eat a potato chipper. And so, so I've gone now, my mother and I, shouldn't say I, my mother and I are now going into these books where they're heavily dialogued, and it's really helps to have translated comics. You just, that's what you're doing, most.
Okay, so unfortunately it's all the time we have left today, so sorry for not allowing questions, but hopefully we'll meet again with Ivanka in the fall next year for another Sophie Castille Award. And thank you for joining us today. Thank you.